Radio 97, we are talking law with our resident lawyer, Despina Priala of boutique law firm Priala Legal in Runaway Bay. She's with us every Thursday morning at this time, bringing her legal expertise with her. She provides some general advice on the latest hot topics. She has experience that spans more than 25 years in the area of property
Whoa.
and commercial law. She also prepares wills as part of estate planning and litigation. With us once again, hi, Despina.
Hi, Wayne. Hi, Brooke.
Good morning, Despina. And coming up this morning, we've got two massive topics. But first up, everyone loves a good bargain. I think we can all confidently say that. But Despina, you're on the show this morning with all of your years of experience, like Wayno just said. And we want to know, in your opinion, can you get quality conveyancing for cheap?
Absolutely not.
Straight up.
Well, so there's no such thing as all-you-can-eat conveyancing.
No, of course not. And anybody that thinks that is a bit foolish. And I like good bargains too, but that's to do with clothes and shoes and handbags and all those things, consumable items, I suppose, as well, but not when it comes to buying and selling property. I mean, this is one of the biggest financial transactions that people can actually enter into in their lives. And I think to skimp out on fees under the guise of cheap, 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 and that's all I need is very foolish, because these days conveyancing, buying and selling property is not simple, it's complex. And it's complex not because we create the complexity, it's complex because of the laws that we have in place, particularly in Queensland, which is quite different to New South Wales. And I mean, your title, All You Can Eat Conveyancing, yeah, well, it's very apt for what we're going to talk about, because we really don't want people to go and use or have the thought of, well, let's go and get it as cheap as possible. No way. And we want to talk about the obvious and the not so obvious reasons as to how and why these types of conveyancing matters, or any conveyancing matters, can go pear-shaped. And again, I've got some real life examples that only happened to us this week. So,
and it's Thursday, so it's only been a couple of days and you've already had some whoppers.
We've had some whoppers. And so we want to talk about those to give some perspective, as we like to do on the show. So I suppose we'll start off by the obvious: what can go wrong and how can a matter go pear-shaped? Well, you don't get any legal advice before you sign that contract. Right. So big no-no. And it doesn't take us long. I've said it so many times. So this is whether you are selling or buying. So whether you're going even to an auction or not, or just signing that contract without an auction, whether you're buyer or seller, get that contract checked. It is absolutely paramount. Then, of course, what you mentioned before about the title, cheap, cheap conveyancing, inadequate legal representation. Right. That's the biggest, I think, one of the biggest issues for people, one of the biggest issues. If you don't have adequate legal representation, how are you going to have someone fend the curveballs that inevitably get thrown at you in a transaction? And it happens all the time on a daily basis. How is that person or persons, if it's cheap, cheap, and they don't have the experience, they don't have the expertise or the skills, how are they going to navigate that for you? Right? So these are the things you've got to think about.
Do you find that many people, I mean, I understand when you're going into a purchase of a house, there's costs for everything. Everyone's putting their hand out, everyone wants money. And you think, okay, well, I'll try and cut a couple of corners. If I can cut a couple of corners, save a few bucks, then I'm going to do that. Do you find many people try to skimp on things like conveyancing? I mean, what percentage are we talking about? A few percent, 10%? I mean,
a large percentage. A large percentage do. And
over 50?
Yes. Oh, well, look, I don't know whether it's over or under 50. There is a large percentage. And yes, there are businesses out there that offer it. I think it's wrong, because it conveys the message that conveyancing is something simple that anybody can do. Yeah. And that is far from the truth. Far from the truth. And yes, people can go out there and establish businesses and, run it the way they like. But I think what they're doing is the potential damage to the community at large by sending the message that it's got to be cheap to be good. This is actually the complete opposite. And so I'll give you some examples of what I'm talking about, because I really need to bring the message home. It's something, as I said, it's one of the biggest financial transactions you enter into, and you've got to do it right. So, yeah, not getting legal advice, getting inadequate legal representation. Some of the things that some of our clients do, also, perhaps not so obvious, is when you're in the middle of that transaction, just read what we send you, because a lot of clients don't read the correspondence, and then a week later or a couple of days later they ask these questions. Well, we actually already answered those, or you haven't read the correspondence and you're not actually following some of our recommendations and directions. And a very basic one is when you're selling property, we tell the client from day one, go contact your bank, sign the discharge authority form. If you don't sign that, the bank will not even know that you're selling, will not get their ducks lined up in a row, will not be ready to settle on the settlement date. Right? They just don't read that. So they just don't bother and they don't do it. So it's reading our instructions, completing all the necessary paperwork. Yes, it's painful. Yes, we know that, but we have to get the documentation completed. And it's all done in the first week. So just get it over and done with, right? And it's not us that is creating it. It's the compliance framework that we inevitably find ourselves in conveyancing. It's just the way that it is. And there is so much compliance. So yes, a lot of paperwork, but just get it done, right, from the get-go, and it'll be sorted. The other thing is people go away, right? So if you're going away on holidays, can you tell us so that we know if you're contactable or not contactable when certain due dates and events arise? So that's, something else. And we can't just run the matter without your instructions. That's a big no-no. We can't do that and make the decisions for you, right? But here are some other great, well, I shouldn't say great examples, should I? Because these are examples of where clients just don't get advice and do the things that they think are right without talking to us first. And it can be a disaster. So clients not having a contract subject to a pest and building report. Now, regardless of the property, land, house, apartment, townhouse, duplex, whatever it is, get it subject to a pest and building report. Now, for land, you're thinking, well, that doesn't make sense. There's no building. Well, yes, I'm aware of that, but you'd still want it subject to certain inspections to be done on the land, just for land alone. But let's talk about a building and pest condition that can go wrong, meaning someone signed a contract. They didn't bother to get it subject to a pest and building report at all. And we've got an example that happened this week. Client signed a contract for an apartment in high rise in Surfers Paradise. They didn't have it subject to a pest and building report because they had already bought a unit in the same building last year. So they're already familiar with the building.
Yeah, we know what this building's like. Yep.
Exactly. And I kid you not, a horror story was discovered. So because the contract was not subject to that condition, right, then they basically signed an unconditional contract. So what happened is that thinking that this unit is the same as the other unit that we bought. Well, no, they're two completely different units, and thinking everything will be hunky-dory. So once they signed, the people actually moved out and vacated. I think there was a tenant in there. So the bed was removed in the master bedroom. And when the bed was removed, the client went in and did an inspection and discovered exposed wiring from the tiled floor coming through. Can you imagine?
Uh-oh.
And I've seen the picture, so I can attest to it. I've seen it this week. Picture was emailed. And the question was, what can we do about it? Yeah. Well, your contract's not subject to a pest and building report, which was a decision you made without checking with us, and you signed the contract anyway.
So in this case, a pest and building report, although it's neither it's certainly not about pests, it would have picked this up and you would have known that there was an issue there.
Yes, and they would have discovered it, and it would have been leverage that the buyer would have had with the seller to say, hey, look at these exposed wirings. This is not really legal or unlawful. Go fix it. Right? So a bit of leverage. Without the condition, the buyer's really got no leverage. Really big mistake. Another problem. So balance deposits. So if we don't check the contract before you sign it, then we can't advise clients about the obvious question to ask is, oh, your contract says there's a balance deposit of 30,000. That's payable, right, when, say, the finance, is satisfied or whatever the condition may be. And this happened this week to another client of ours. So when we had that discussion with the client about, well, do you know that there's 29,000 payable due in about a week? The exact answer that the client gave us was, oh, I thought that we could pay whatever we wanted. I don't have that money.
Uh-oh.
So that's a problem because it's a term in the contract. And if you don't have the money to pay your balance deposit, you will be in breach right? When that deposit is due, a seller can terminate, right? Pull it from under you, take the initial deposit that you paid and keep it and resell it to someone else. And in this market, we're seeing a lot of multiple offers being put under contract. So, and it's, we've got a housing crisis. We've got, basically, we've got multiple offers on various contracts coming through. We've got an accommodation crisis. We've got it being more competitive than ever in the market to buy property, and there's slim pickings. So with all of that in mind, you can't just think, oh yeah, well, it's not going to get pulled from under me. It can. Other issues, pontoons, when you buy a house, they're not necessarily approved, right? So we can check that online. We know how to do it. Not everybody does, right? So those are the things to check for. If your property's in Burleigh Waters or Burleigh Heads, there's a lot of properties that have koala habitats at the back of the property. We know how to check for those, right? This is before you sign a contract. And if you're a seller, not disclosing those very important infrastructure things we talked about recently on the show about manholes and sewer lines and sewer connections and, drainage areas on your property. You've got to know how to disclose that. We talked about some tools about that. So all of these reasons and so many more, you've got to get your contract checked, and have it properly checked by someone who's experienced, who's got the skills, who is not a all-you-can-eat conveyancing firm, in my opinion. Right, I can be, criticised for that comment, but clearly someone's got to pay a reasonable fee for a great service by experienced and skilled people when you're buying and selling property.
Yep. So if the price is too good to be true, it probably is.
Absolutely.
Oh, so be careful. Thank you so much, Jasvina. Coming up next, can a body corporate make a lot owner pay an excess on an insurance claim? This one's pretty controversial. Stay tuned to Talking Law, coming up in just a moment.